Right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone feel refreshed after the small, quick break that we had. With that, we are going to start the first session of the Research Week 2024 here at University of Moratuwa. The session that we are going to start is a very important session for us as researchers. I would say this would be the heart of the research that we are going to do, which is research methodology. So to guide us through this session, we have an expert. We are fortunate to have with us Professor Nilas Pereira from the Department of Transport Management and Logistics Engineering here at University of Moratuwa. So Professor Pereira is not only a renowned academic and researcher, but also someone who brings deep insights into the practicalities of conducting meaningful research. So I'm sure this session will bring both insightful and engaging. So without further ado, let's warmly welcome Professor Nilas Pereira onto the stage.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we are going to basically talk about something from a very superficial level, because I think at the end of the day, I need to address a wide variety of audiences from different faculties. So we might not go into the nuts and bolts of a systematic review or a bibliometric review. We'll touch it from a very superficial level, and at the end, during the Q&A session, of course, we can, of course, go into further detail. Well, first of all, I have to say that this is not my expertise. I'm a supply chain guy. My research is in supply chain logistics, so that's my bread and butter. I just happen to have done some publications using these with some of my colleagues, especially from Australia, and that's basically my perception. So I'll be presenting my perception. I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, and I'm very much open to invite you all to explore this domain as much as possible, because this is a growing field. So first of all, I think a majority of the audience seem to be higher degrees by research students, and I think you all know the answer for this question. Why do a literature review? I think there's no real requirement of an elaborate answer, but you know that you need to have a very strong foundation in order to build a skyrise, right? Without that foundation, you will encounter a lot of problems. Regardless of whether you are doing a BSc honors research, or a MSc research, or an MPhil, or a PhD, you need to have your foundation very solidly built. And that foundation essentially requires you to have a very solid understanding of the state of the art. We call it the state of the art. That essentially means where the knowledge is lying as of now. That's very important. Because when you go into a progress review, maybe for your dissertation defense, or even beyond that, if you want to go and publish something, you may encounter a problem. Maybe the reviewers or the examiners would say, yes, but you have missed this particular domain of research. You have probably missed investigating some specific aspect of research. And that really opens up a whole new can of worms, and it can be a little daunting. And that's why you need to essentially ensure that your literature review is solid. Because when you have a strong foundation, ostensibly that means you will have a good foundation for a great building to be built on top of that. I'm not saying the literature review alone will get you there. As Professor Seneviratna, the UGC chairman, said, you just can't just rely on only publishing literature reviews, only focusing on literature reviews. You need to do substantial work in your field, but the literature review itself guarantees you a good start, a head start. And that's where I think you need to start that with a very good vision of what you want to achieve. So when you start a research, obviously, sometimes, different people would do higher degrees for different purposes. Some of you might be keen to grow your intellect, to learn more. Some of you might be thinking, right, I did my BSc, okay, what's the next step? Do an MSc. Some of you might think, yes, I need to work towards a promotion. I'm not saying either is wrong, but at a particular point, you will come across a point to decide on doing a HDR. So at that particular point, one of the first things I think you need to understand is what are you going to do? It might be very attractive to think of a topic off the top of your head instantaneously, but whether that holds water in the long run is a real question you need to test with literature. So when you start your research journey, I think the first step is knowing where you are. When you know where you are, when you know the knowledge that is already there in your field, that will ground you to deliver good things. And obviously, when you start a research, you would have an idea of where you want to be. But as you go along, of course, you will end up with different destinations. And this is my journey also. When I did my PhD so many years ago at University of Sydney, what I started was not what I ended up doing. But if you ask me, I'm happy of what I did rather than what I started. Because when I got selected, my supervisor, Professor Benam Fahimnia, selected me to do a PhD in sustainable supply chain management. And through the literature review, I identified, well, this is not really my bread and butter. I'm not very passionate about it. And I found another literature gap which I explored, and that's something that opened up so many doors to me and gave me an opportunity to contribute in many ways through numerous publications. So that door was unlocked through literature, understanding literature. So one of the first things I want to start off this presentation is by emphasizing the importance of a literature to you, review to you. Because most of the time HDR candidates assume it's just a process. It's sort of a motion that you need to go through. That's not entirely the case. This is where you start. And if you have a very good ground in there, you can go a long way. And for me, I will touch on that later. I think most of my career was benefited by the systematic review that I did under my undergraduate study, my PhD, doctoral study, which gave me a lot of unique opportunities in my career. So basically, knowing where you are is very important, right? And to know that, systematic reviews and bibliometric reviews play an important role. And of course, with that, I also want to quote Sir Isaac Newton, who quotes that if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants, which is also inspiration for the title of this presentation. So when you know your literature very well, when you know who have contributed to your field very well, when you know those papers very well, that means you are in a position, you are positioned on a pedestal to look farther and identify what you can do and how you can contribute to your discipline. And that's one of the unique benefits of doing a systematic review, because it gives a holistic understanding. It gives you an opportunity to see things that you were perhaps unaware of, or literature that might have not popped up previously or through a traditional routine literature review. Dr. Prabodh mentioned a very good point in the morning about the access to databases. I think this is a serious issue that all of us face. And sometimes that limitation of access perhaps precludes our view. Because if you don't have access to some of the best journals, the best databases, we might miss out on some of the state of the art, some of the best research that is being carried out. And that is a disadvantage when you want to go ahead and make a meaningful contribution to the literature. Because at the end of the day, especially for those who are looking at finding a PhD opportunity overseas, your application would be essentially reviewed on various factors, but the quality of the research you did in Sri Lanka and the publications will play a significant role. And in order to get there, I think having a strong literature review is fundamental, But if you have a good systematic review, you would know farther more than what anyone else would know. So I'll just explain this further. Now this is from a paper that we published a couple of years ago in a Q1 journal, a systematic review, where we looked at different types of reviews. And I've just condensed that into several categories to sort of analyze under different facts. So most of us, perhaps at the very outset, would do generic reviews, where we would sort of go by convenience, we look into certain areas. Perhaps when you start your research degrees, you'll perhaps start with your supervisor's publications, maybe go through the citation list that is there, the reference list that is there. Maybe you'll do some convenient searches. But it is not an ideal method, because there can be a lot of blind spots. Some can do a critical review, or you could go to an overview review. But what I'm prescribing is a systematic and bibliometric review. It is time consuming. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that is easily manifested. To be quite frank, when I was doing my PhD, I think I spent about 2 years of my study on my literature review, because it was a systematic and bibliometric review. Not that I spent the entire 2 years on the literature review. I was doing things on parallel from the second year onwards with respect to data collection, analysis, and designing the lab experiment and so on. But you need to do a very holistic piece of work, and you can't rush things. Some of us are keen to rush things, but systematic review is not an approach to rush things. It's a living, organic being, in my opinion. It's something that you need to continuously do throughout your degree. And it's not very easy. It's quite difficult. It's time consuming. You need to have a codified approach to doing it. But the advantage of this is it makes your life very easy at the end. Because imagine if you go out and submit your thesis. It goes out to a examiner who says, you have not referred to this important piece of work. What is your thought on a certain body of literature that is emerging from a certain research community? That is a big risk. I think that's a risk that you can avoid through systematic reviews, because you have a very good insight on your fundamental research area. So one thing that I was, when I started my PhD, my supervisor told me, very casually he told me, why don't you just start doing a systematic review? And I thought, okay, fine. I mean, I'm Sri Lankan, so usually you say yes to your supervisor, right? So naturally I said yes, without knowing what it entails to. So then he gave me some notes to refer. He arranged a session with someone from a different faculty who was doing systematic reviews. I got involved with that person, got some inputs from her. And then I realized this is a really interesting thing, and I self-learned how to do systematic reviews and bibliometric reviews. And I did it just for the sake of, initially I just wanted to make sure that my supervisor was happy, to be quite frank, right? That's how it started. So 2 years down, when I finished my literature review chapter for my thesis, my supervisor told me, I think I see something important in this. I think this is a very important body of literature. Why don't we consider publishing this? And I said yes. Well, obviously that's a good thing to do. So I started working on the paper. I got help of a colleague as well, and we published the paper. And it was published in the #1 ranked Q1 journal in the field in our discipline, which has a H index of over 200. And actually what happened was something that I said, without any thought, opened up a lot of opportunities, because now the paper was published on the journal, and whenever I went to a conference, they would say, you're the guy from Sri Lanka who has this systematic review, right? And that's something that was a very unique opportunity. And a couple of years ago, I was invited to actually write the 2 book chapters for the handbooks on supply chain management on my area, my specific area, by Paul Grave, and the other one is by Wiley. So I think that is basically because of this, because the start was good. When you started with limited risk, you know your field well. And when you know your field well, you can sort of ensure that you can create some sort of a traction with respect to some of the issues that come up. And then you can sort of take that knowledge forward. You can off the top of your head, you can say, there's a research gap here, there's a research gap there, this is the person who's good at designing these type of experiments, this is the person you should collaborate with if you are doing a research like this. You should refer to someone else like from this part of the world for a research like this. So some of my research students know this, because off the top of my head, I can say that for my discipline. So what I'm trying to say is, you should go even further. You should think about your area and say, if you invest on a systematic review, you would know inside out your discipline, and you would be able to sort of connect with these people, right? You have to start from the bottom, and if you work your way up, you would have a very broad understanding of your topic, which transcends through different parameters. So that's, I think, something very important to know. And also, the last point is something I already mentioned. Most of the time when you go through a traditional or conventional literature review, it would be mostly incomplete. But when you have a systematic review, it's generally comprehensive. Now, I have often seen as a reviewer sometimes, and also as a researcher, sometimes some papers are published saying, they are systematic reviews and so on. Well, if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, the word systematic refers to a very simple line, done according to a system or plan in a complete, efficient or determined way. So if you go by the book, most of the reviews that we would see is actually systematic. You can classify it as systematic. But when you really go deeper, I think we can't just look at the semantics and just the words. I think we need to also go beyond that to identify what really qualifies a literature review as a systematic review. So one of the first things I specially identify is that it should be an overview of primary research. So this is a secondary research. You're basically getting feeding off of other people's research. So you should give an overview that is not easily tangible from the primary research, right? So that will give some sort of an insight. It should be a story that is woven together. So say for example, in a specific discipline, you might have a sub area that is growing in importance. You're seeing an increase in publications in that area. So it might not be visible to the naked eye, but through meta-analysis, through bibliometry, you can prove that there is a trend. Or you can say that a certain gap has not been sufficiently filled over time. So what we perceive in a systematic review is to sort of give an overview of a systematic review. And it has to be a clear method. So oftentimes now, sometimes in a traditional literature review, you just find papers and you just do it. So if the examiner asks you, how did you come across this paper? Why is that paper not there, right? It might not be very easy for you to answer that question. So in a systematic review, I think in the next slide I'm showing an example from one of my publications. It has a reproducible method. So if I do it, I get the same result. If someone else here does it, you would get the same result. I think that's a very important part of science as well. You need to have reproducibility. You should not have bias. So oftentimes, I think Professor Seneviratne was also mentioning that sometimes when we write literature, or rather research grants or papers, sometimes there's a bias. And sometimes that can be excused also, because you know your research, you know your colleagues' research, you know your supervisor or collaborators research. So you might miss some of the best research that might be coming out from a different research community altogether. But through this, there's no bias. You know, whatever qualifies through the method needs to be reported, and that gives more, it democratizes research, which is very important. So basically, it's evidence-based, and at the end of the day, one of the important things that I feel of a systematic review is that it answers two questions. One is, you should know, anyone who's reading it should know what we know, but it should also guide us on what we don't know, because that is how new research is created. So for example, the review paper that I mentioned to you earlier has been cited widely, and that is primarily because we explore different clusters of research and future research directions. And that is a contribution that we are making. It's not purely based on the literature, the primary data. We are drawing inputs from that and analyzing it and saying that these are areas that are hot topics in the future. These should be analyzed and researched and published in the future. So I think you can catalyze the field. For a particular publication, we did an analysis. We found out that there is a correlation between systematic reviews that are published on good journals and the number of papers that follow suit in that domain. So of course, synthesizing what we don't know is a very important aspect of a systematic review. And then it catalyzes the field for more studies. That's very important. I think as academics, researchers, that's one of the things I think we should all be focused on. How we can catalyze our field, how we can drive forward our field by inspiring others to do research. What I felt is systematic reviews are one of those vehicles which we can use in that journey. I'm not saying it's the only vehicle. It might not be the best vehicle, but then again, it's a good way of providing that insight. So, you know, just to sum up, I'd like to sort of go back to my childhood. I don't know whether that resonates with the audience here, but you know, when I was a kid, I used to play a lot of Age of Empires games. Some of the people who are my age would realize this. Most of the time I played, my parents didn't know at that time. So I would, you know, stay up late. My parents thought I was studying, but I was playing Age of Empires. No harm done, at least, I guess. So you see this map, and you have a invisible area. So most of the time, what I feel is I get queries from from students sometimes outside of University of Moratuwa, or some students I meet at different forums that struggle with publication. I'm not saying it's a common thing for everyone, but sometimes what I feel is, when I dig into details, is sometimes you are looking at it from a myopic level. You are looking at the visual field that is available to you. You are not seeing the full picture like this, right? So those who played Age of Empires knows that, you know, there were some cheat codes that you can use to get the entire visibility of the map. So I'm not saying that we should use a cheat code. I'm saying, you know, a systematic review provides that visual field, 100% visual field. When you have that, you know all the nooks and crannies, and that basically gives you an opportunity to sort of target your research in a certain way, and that's very useful. And my first advice, especially to HDR candidates, is when you are focusing on a systematic review, think of it as the foundation for your career, right? Not as a pathway to publication, because I will explain the difficulties of publishing a systematic review later. If you do your systematic review well, it will give you yields several years later, like what I told you in my case. It might not give you quick wins like in a year or two. It might give you, it might establish your name in, let's say, 4 years, 5 years, somewhere down the line. So as I said, my perspective is basically based on, well, I've published, I think, 4 Q1 systematic reviews. yeah, these are 3 of them. These are the most cited ones out of those 4. So my perspective is based on my publications and what I know. And I have to be very clear that I might not know a lot of other things, right? In terms of systematic reviews or bibliometric reviews, because I know there are different schools of thought, different perceptions on how these are done. And naturally, what I'm going to present in the next few slides is based on my understanding. So don't take it as God's word or something like that, right? You can argue, you can think on your own and say whether this is right or wrong. You can modify it. You can perhaps disagree with it as well. That's perfectly fine. So the first thing about a systematic review is you need to have a proper process. I don't know whether the letters are very clearly visible, but you need to come up with a structure, a process of how you come up with the literature that is relevant to you. That's very important. Because I told you that you need to have reproducibility of the literature. So if someone else does the literature search, they should get the same answer or the same pool of papers that I got. Otherwise, there's a problem. So what we usually do in this sort of a journey is we need to first, one of the most difficult things which Dr. Prabodh mentioned, we need to have access to databases, literature databases. So what I do is, I get asked to review for journals. When there's an Elsevier journal that asked me, I always say yes very quickly, because when you review, they give 3 months or 6 months of free access to Scopus. We used to have Scopus access readily, I think, about 5 years ago, but we don't have it anymore. So to circumvent that issue, if you get invited by an Elsevier journal to do a review, even if you have tons of work, just say yes, because you will get access to Scopus. So once you have that, I think you have to then derive a keyword criteria. That is very important. You need to know. Now, first thing, you need to scope down your research. That is not very easy. And that requires a lot of iterative discussion with your supervisor or collaborators or whoever it is there. And then you need to identify what are the words that are being used by previous publications. Now, one of the issues that I've encountered is in one of the areas I work on, supply chain forecasting. Forecasting can mean different things to different people, right? Most of the time, forecasting is essentially weather forecasting. That's what majority of us would presume from it. So when you just search that term, you'd only get a lot of publications on areas that are not relevant to your research area. So you need to really identify what is the structure that you need to use. What are the keywords that you need to use? So it takes a lot of time. I tell you that it's not something that happens overnight. You have to play around with it. You spend some time, listening to music or drinking a cup of coffee. You just play around with papers, look at keywords that are there, try the keywords, try the search with a keyword, then remove it, see what's the difference, do some sort of exclusions, and identify what is the ideal keyword structure. And in doing this, generally, most of the publishers or most of the seminal authors in this domain obviously advise that you should only look at peer-reviewed research, and you should also look at only journals which are published in English, which is not entirely acceptable scientifically. You could say that there might be a good contribution that is published through a Chinese journal or a Russian journal. But obviously, even if you find a Chinese journal or a Russian journal, you might not be able to understand what it is, right? I mean, at least I won't be. I don't know about you all. So you have various mechanisms to streamline and reduce the number of papers. And you then have to come up with various other strategies, like, for example, exclusion keywords. You have to then go through them manually. Sometimes one of the biggest mistakes I see is people, when they get the pool of papers from Scopus, they just mindlessly think that this is correct. Scopus is not always correct. So you have to put some thought into it and go through those papers. Not to say that you read the entire paper, you can sometimes just go through the title, the abstract, and if at all it's very obvious it's not relevant in your field, you can discard it. But generally what we do is we get some insights from experts. So for example, when I was doing my PhD, I would have an Excel sheet. I would have the papers that I'm 100% convinced, that would be the green list. Then there would be another spreadsheet which would be the yellow list, and then another one which is the red list. So the red list, I'm 100% convinced that this is not relevant to my scope, but I still show it to my supervisor anyway. The yellow list, I'm not 100% sure. So sometimes we would end up having a discussion, an argument on whether it's relevant or not. And then once we sort of go through that, we need to sort of identify a process in terms of refining it. The last few steps are really not necessary for a thesis, in my opinion. If you want to go for a publication, it might be necessary, but I have to advise you that publishing a systematic review is not very easy. I will mention that in my last slide. So when you go to that level, you need to sort of contact seminal authors in your field. You need to send it to them, politely ask them to go through the list and verify whether the papers are relevant, whether we've missed out on anything. It's a different kettle of fish altogether. So one of the fundamental building blocks is having access to these databases. I told you one tip of doing that. Science Direct is something obviously you can access to some degree, but you will get the metadata, but I don't think we have access to most of the publications that are there. So that's a unfortunate thing. So we might have to come up with mechanisms, might not be the best way to put it forward, but you might have to come up with various techniques to access some of these databases, and that's obviously an unfortunate challenge that you need to focus. And I also mentioned on the keyword structure, which is which is very important, because this is actually what really drives your systematic review. This is from one of my publications. It's on optimization in container terminals, I think. And I think this took us probably 1 to 1.5 years to develop this keyword structure. It might seem very simple to you, which is understandable. It seemed very simple to me when I started doing systematic reviews in 2015, but it takes a lot of time because you have to test different words, you have to check combinations. Even the change of operator, logic operator, would change the number of results. So you have to really play around, you have to come up with different Excel dumps, compare them together. I'm not going to go into those details, but if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help. But the thing is, this is a very important step. If you want to do a systematic review, developing the keyword structure is the foundation. So the foundation of the foundation is developing the keyword structure. And if you do that well, you're well sorted. That is giving you a good insight. So perhaps if you are doing an MSc by research, you might be thinking, oh, well, I'm supposed to finish in 1 year. Do I have time to do a systematic review? Perhaps not entirely, but then again, I wouldn't say that you shouldn't also, because what I would say is if you're doing an MSc with the intention of becoming an academic, you should focus on becoming an expert in your discipline. So in order to do that, you need to have that insight about your area. You should be able to answer that area very clearly. If someone you meet at a conference, or maybe someone who's junior to you comes and asks you something in your domain, you should be able enough to answer. So perhaps, as I said, it's a living body of work. Throughout the year you work on this thing, you report it in your thesis, and you can even continue it beyond that, and your next degree, PhD, perhaps can be on the same domain. So this keyword structure is something I feel a lot of people who even publish in conferences, I think in journals it's very difficult to publish a systematic review without a good keyword structure. But even in a journal or even an abstract, this is a point they miss, and this is something I want to especially highlight. Now, I also want to draw a line between two very important points. When I started the journey, I was of the impression that systematic reviews and bibliometric reviews are the same. It's not the case. Systematic review is very different to a bibliometric review. Bibliometric review is mostly statistical. It's statistics driven. And we report on different connections between researchers, different things and so on. Now, these are some of the softwares that you can use. VOSweaver, Gephi, BibExcel. There's a new one I haven't tried, Insights by Clarivate. And you can even do things through programming, which I have done. And the thing is, you have to be very careful in understanding what is the importance of bibliometrics. Because sometimes I feel a lot of, especially people from a mathematical background, get carried away with bibliometrics because we want to report on the statistics and connectivity, but we don't want to, sometimes even I did that, I'm being genuinely honest. We have to always look at a systematic review from the perspective of, even a thesis from the perspective of the reader, not from your perspective. What would a reader, I mean, obviously, whoever is reading it would gain out of your work. So the bibliometric software should be used for that purpose. I recall a very good example from my career. When I was doing a systematic review, this was done, I think I was in Sri Lanka by that time. Again, for a Q1 journal, we got an invitation to do one. My supervisor, I think this was during the Corona time, so communication was less, and I was doing a lot of, I was bored at home. I was writing research grants, finishing up papers, and a lot of things. So I played around with some of these softwares, and I came up with so many analyses for that particular paper. And I sent it to my co-author, my supervisor, former PhD supervisor, and he said, most of this is not necessary because a lot of people will not really have interest in it. And that's how I realized this lesson. Sometimes you have to be mindful of what you use the software to. Sometimes just because we can do it, we should not do it, right? So these softwares will open you opportunities to do various types of analysis, but do it with a purpose, right? It's about working smart. So when you develop your thesis, think of the analysis, the statistical or meta-analysis that will add value to your thesis more than just doing it for the sake of doing it. So some examples that we do is like clustering. So within a field, how are the clusters? What are the connectivities? That sort of a thing you can do. The chronological growth of different disciplines within the field. Analysis of different factors, like let's say, for example, the methods, the popular methods, the growth of methods, the top authors in the field. And within different disciplines, there might be different authors. And the main institutions. That will be very useful because that 2 boxes on the bottom left is very useful for a student who's seeking to do a PhD. Because when you know the top authors and the top institutions in your discipline, that means you know where to look out for and where you should pitch for if you want to find a PhD, rather than mindlessly applying. You would also know the main gaps. And in some of the papers, what we identify is that there is an emergence of new methods being brought into the field, right? Currently, I'm involved in another systematic review with my former supervisor, Professor Benam Fahimnia, and another academic at QUT. And even in that one, what we are seeing is there's a tremendous growth in the field, which is growing very rapidly. And we are seeing a lot of changes with respect to the methods that are being used. So if you refer to a paper 5 years back, that might not give you an entire overview of the methods that you can use. But if you look at if you do a systematic review or a bibliometric analysis, you will know what are the limitations of certain methods for your research and what are potential methods that will really bolster your career. So bibliometric insights provide a very important outlook in terms of what you can gain. And when you're doing this, I think a very critical advice I want to give you is you should, I already told that, you should look at it objectively, not as a mindless analysis. and you should know what you should analyze, and you should do the clustering of things properly. A common mistake is you don't do proper vetting of results. When you get results out of a systematic review, you should know whether it's right or wrong. You should not just accept it because it's there. So generally what we do is, if you want to go and put it in the thesis, get insights from your supervisor. Maybe get insights from a collaborator. Get your supervisor to, get a collaborator as a sounding board to verify whether your results are correct. Because it will be embarrassing if you go and say, I did a systematic review, but if the proper vetting is not done. Because if you missed a paper, that might be problematic. And I have to also mention that sometimes the research databases are also wrong. Now, some journals have not been indexed on Scopus before 1995 or something like that. So sometimes you would say, this is what we found on Scopus, but then someone else might say, there's a seminal paper published in 1992. You are missing that. How can you talk about this discipline without that paper? So you need to have that insight. That is very important. So whenever you do it, it should not be an individual exercise. Have that conversation with the expert in your field, which is usually your supervisor, or maybe there can be collaborators. Some of you might have collaborators from our university or outside of the university, or probably an international author. And we have to also understand the practicality of the field and the contextual connection. What do I mean here? Sometimes it might not be useful for you to reinvent the wheel. Say for example, now last year we published a paper on optimization in container terminals. That's a systematic review. So it might be pointless for someone else to do a systematic review this year. Because last year, one of my MSc students who's now doing a PhD in Netherlands, Buddhi, myself and a professor from Tsinghua University in China, we published it. So if you are doing a paper on that area, the best thing is you use that paper as a starting point. We have the process that is already there. You can use the process and find the new papers that have been published since then. That will help you guide your way. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel and try to find things before 2022 or something, because that is covered already in the paper. And that will be a good opportunity for you to build your paper on. And then similarly, maybe there might be areas which have very limited interest, a niche area, maybe which has very few papers. So if that is the case, you might have to think about how you are going to structure your research, because just having 10-20 papers in that area might mean that you need to do more than a literature review to justify your study. So you need to think about that from a different angle. So you have to understand that it might not be a panacea, it might not be just a mindless solution. But at the end of the day, whatever you do as a systematic review should provide a thorough analysis of the state of the art. It should give a clear understanding. If someone goes through a systematic review, your thesis chapter, or eventually it might be a paper, it has to tell the audience what is the state of the art. They should have a clear understanding of what you have done and what is the requirement of research for the future. That's very important. So from the perspective, now we are in the postgraduate day, so from the perspective of a HDR candidate, I think I want to sum up the main reasons why you should do this. It provides you strong grounding. It gives you a very good platform to build on. It provides less blind spots. You don't have, you might not encounter a problem where someone in the progress review panel or the examination panel asks you a question and you can't answer. It allows you to frame your hypothesis very well because you know the literature very clearly. And one of the most important things is you know that, when you get a thesis, chronologically going through the second chapter is the literature review. So when you have a very neat literature review, obviously the examiner is in a very sweet spot. They are thinking, all right, this person has done a good job. And it helps them to go through the rest of the thesis, and it provides a very good outlook on what you have done. So having a certain notion of what you have done is very important, and perhaps if you have done a good job, it gives you certain publication opportunities which are not guaranteed. Sometimes postgraduate students think just because doing a systematic review, you can publish it, maybe at conferences, but going to a journal is not easy. If you want to go for a Scopus Q1 journal, generally you need to get a invitation from the editors. It can work in two ways. It can be that the editor directly writes to you and recognizes that you are an expert in the field, or else you have a conversation. If you know the editor, you can have a chat with the editor and say, hey, this is an area that we were thinking of. Would you recommend us doing a Q1 journal article on it? And then the editor will put that idea to the editorial board and then say, yes, why not? This is a much needed area. Go ahead and do it. And it is something that needs to be of serious interest to the research community. So just publishing a systematic review is not feasible if it is not of serious interest to the research community. Sometimes some areas might not be, I'm not saying they are fringe research, I'm not letting that down, but they might be burgeoning research, they might be new research, and it might not be at a maturity stage which requires a publication as such, but your literature review will help you to position it properly. And generally, when you are going for a systematic review, if you want to publish at a Q1 level, you need a very strong nexus of co-authors, ideally from different institutions with a very good reputation in the field. That is one important dynamic of publishing a systematic review. Without that, it's almost impossible because journals generally don't consider reviews very easily. They get a lot of submissions on reviews from all the MSc students, the PhD students, and more often than not, they do a desk reject. But they need to see what is the difference that you're bringing in, and that makes a huge difference. And I think you need to make a case to the editorial board. Yes, you have experts in the field who have authored this paper, and this provides the best understanding of the field at large. And then they will consider it, and of course, still it goes through the review process, and sometimes it might get rejected. And I think one of the most important realities I want to highlight is systematic review is not something that you can easily come up with. I have met sometimes some students ask me, this is something I can do in 2 months, 3 months. No, not really. It will take 1 to 2 years for you to develop the first draft alone. Sometimes it can be even more. The EJO paper that I told you about, which is in the journal that has H index over 200, I think we took about 3 years to finalize the draft, the first draft, right? And it took us 1.5 years of back and forth, 2 revisions to get it published. That's the reality. So a lot of people think that this is a low-hanging fruit, and a lot of students think it's an easy way to get a publication. So my point here is not to think of it as a publication. If it becomes a publication, it will happen. If you do a good systematic review, your supervisor, your collaborators will say, why don't you publish this? But don't do it with that purpose. Do it with the purpose of building a strong foundation for your career. Because when you know your area inside out, when you are an expert in the literature, you know all the research gaps, you know all the main professors, you know all the main institutions, the research communities, that means you're set for your career. That means you can ace any interview with a top professor, you can show your expertise, your robustness, and get maybe a PhD opportunity, maybe a postdoctoral fellowship, maybe co-author paper with them, because the most important thing is to be able to showcase to them, to the experts, that you're an expert in the field. You might not be having a lot of publications, you might not be the same age as they are, but you can show that you know that area inside out. So that's what I want to highlight. Start doing a systematic review with that intention, not the intention of publishing, because I have to be very honest, I'm not discouraging you. Based on my experience, it's a long journey. My experience is publishing a systematic review is harder, maybe 3-4 times harder than publishing a regular journal paper on the same journal. So for example, EJO, I have 4 papers there. This paper, the systematic review was the hardest. The other 3 papers were not that difficult because they are based on our primary data collection, our analysis, we know it inside out, we can do the analysis, we can write it properly, it's easy. But when you're reporting on other people's work, putting a perspective, analyzing things, it's not easy. So therefore, use it as a pedestal to elevate yourself to the next level, and whatever comes out of it will come out if you have done a good job. So that's, I think, the main message I want to highlight. Okay, that's basically it, and I think if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Yes, thank you for that insightful presentation. Just I have two concerns about the systematic review. So when, as you said, when it comes to the publication level, so there will be so many inclusion, exclusion criteria, and the method that you have selected, the journals, keywords, everything. So how we are going to put those things into our research paper, because sometimes research papers word limits will be 8,000 to 10,000, but when you include those material selection methods and everything, it will already exceed it. So how we include those information without damaging to the reproducibility of these results. And also when you are doing systematic revision, there will be lots of references, and including that one also, and managing the limit of the word counts and all those things. So how can we address those concerns?
Yeah, so about the first one was about, like, if you want to write a paper, how do you limit yourself in terms of the word count? I think you have to be very miserly in understanding what you should report and what you should not report. It's a challenge, I accept it. But as I said, the difference in a systematic review is you understand the strands of thought and the key growth areas of the research. So you don't go into detail and share all that is reported in, let's say, a pool of 100 or 200 or 500 papers. What you do is you have a very decent understanding of the overall area. You write it in a way that that would give an insightful overview to a lay reader. So it's about giving more information with less words. So it's an art in itself, but it is challenging. I remember with one of my publications, we had to bring it down from 15,000 words to 9,000 words, and it was very challenging. But we did it somehow. But in a thesis, of course, that might not necessarily be a problem. So the second question was about reference list. So the reference list, of course, generally there is a limitation with the reference list. If you want to go to publish, or even for a thesis, you don't want a very lengthy reference list. So what you have to do is, when you actually find out through a systematic process the key papers, I mean, you will find out maybe, let's say, 100 papers for the sake of argument. You will identify that, let's say, within that 100 there would be different categories of papers. Maybe not all papers are Q1. Some papers are Q1. And maybe there are papers which might not be Q1 or Q2, which are still making a very important contribution. So when you live with that, at a particular point, you will realize out of these 100 papers, which are the most salient ones for your research. So you will cite those papers more. You will refer those papers more. Some of the other papers you might not entirely refer, or you might put it in the appendix. So for example, in my thesis also, I didn't cite all the papers that I got from my systematic review, because some papers were not entirely relevant to the scope that I was in. So I had to abbreviate that and leave out certain clusters I found out from the systematic review from my thesis. And when I went for the publication also, I had to do that. And in one case, what we did was we came up with a table, because one of the reviewers asked for the list of publications. So we had an appendix with all the papers, the journal, and all those information separately. So it's a challenge. It's a very good question, but there are certain ways of mitigating that. I hope I answered your question.
Sure, thank you, sir. One last question about that. So nowadays, most of people are trying to use the Prisma as a protocol to the
Sorry?
Prisma as a protocol for the systematic review. So if you introduce, like when you are mentioning it, it's in our research paper. If we have to mention the protocol itself, you have to follow these stages. So if we left certain stage, because if we mention all these steps, then your paper will be, as you said, 50,000 words might be that. So if you left that certain stages, will it be damaged to our reproducibility? What's your
well, I think if you want to go to a publication, you're asking about publication, right? So from a publication perspective, what I generally do is, whenever I'm writing a paper, not just a systematic review, any paper, I would, this is something I always advise my students also, I would look at papers published in that same area very recently in our target journals and get an understanding, similar papers, and get an understanding of what is the structure that they have approached. This is something I learned from my supervisor when I was in Sydney. Whenever you are trying to publish a paper, he said, look at the 2 or 3 most similar papers that have been published over the last 2 years in a journal of your category, a journal you target. So if you look at it, it gives an insight on what approach they have taken. And obviously, it has been accepted. That's why it's published. So generally, whenever I have a concern whether I should put too much information or too less information, I always try to think of it from that perspective. What has very recent publications on similar journals done? Because they also have to go through the same constraints. They have to face the same constraints, and they mostly would go through the same reviewers, more or less. I mean, there would be a pool, obviously, but at least one reviewer might be the same reviewer that you will get. So it would give you the guidance on that. So I know that now, for example, my field has a qualitative side and a quantitative side. So most of my publications up to now have been in quantitative, so-called quantitative journals. But when I'm going to a qualitative journal, I would have to completely change the structure of it. I can't just use what I used in EJO. Just because I have that sort of a publication doesn't mean I will easily get through to a qualitative journal. So what I always do is I think about the journal and its relevance and try to connect it with that. That will help you, I think, because each and every journal, their editors, their way of thinking is very different. So even the systematic reviews, the 4 that I have published, are very different from one another. For example, the one we had in very recently published in maritime economics and logistics, we had to do a lot of different changes because the editors wanted a different type of an analysis. After several rounds, we did that. So refer to the journal and what they want. That will give you a good insight, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. So we have time for another question, and then we can wind up.
Professor, I have a question related to the AI tool when you are using for the literature review. So there's a lot of AI tools there when we uploaded the journal that is summarized what is the future focus and results. All the documents are summarized and given to us. So can we use those things? Is it recommended to for the researchers?
It's a subjective question, I think. In my opinion, I think it's a good starting point because it gives you an understanding of where you are. And it's very useful, and maybe in the panel discussion they can elaborate on that because they are talking about it. But I think what I felt is when you go to the point of doing a research degree or publishing, the real question that the examiners or the reviewers ask is, how much of this contribution is yours, and whether you are, you have earned it, right? So we have this old adage, like when you get a bachelor's degree, when you are at the level of knowledge of a bachelor, when you master a subject, you have a master's degree. When you have doctored a subject, you become a doctor, right? So that's the traditional way of thinking. So if at all you can prove that you have mastered the subject and the doctored a subject, you're eligible for that particular degree. So in order to do that, I think you can use those tools, but you need to bring in your own secret sauce, I feel. So when you go to a journal, for example, journals would often check what is the AI contribution. They will have various tools to do that. So if it is excessive, it's not good on you. It will get desk rejected, or sometimes it might lead to negative circumstances. So so therefore, I think it's a good starting point, but it's important to also sort of bring in your own interpretation into it, because I still feel that some of these tools don't provide some of the insights which you can draw. I'll give an example now. When in one of these papers, one of the systematic reviews, we got expertise from 3 professors in 3 different continents to verify and vet our paper. And they came up with comments that we weren't considering, and we acknowledged them in the publication. So they were saying that these things, probably you could mention this, why don't you mention this? There were like 2-3 important nuggets that came out of it that were not part of the analysis. At that point, of course, we didn't have AI. But what I'm trying to say is that there are certain things that might be left of field, which is not captured by AI, but is significant to the growth of the field. Things that you can tell by your intuition, by your gut feeling, which might not be captured by AI. And certain things that you can even get your expertise put into in forecasting. So use those tools. But when you go for a publication or when you submit your thesis, always have evidence to show that you have done the rigorous job yourself, because if it gets flagged at a certain point, it might have certain challenges, because different journals, different universities have different policies with respect to the use of AI, the level of use, the depth that you go through. So whenever you're using those tools, be aware of those policies also, because otherwise it might lead to a problem. I hope I gave a clear answer.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are running behind schedule, so I'll just hand over the torch back to controls.
Once again, my heartfelt appreciation to Professor Nilas Pereira for doing such an amazing job delivering a very clear set of a very clear speech, as well as in touching almost all the aspects of systematic literature review. And also a heartfelt thank you for the questions that was given from the audience for making this event engaging and interesting for everyone. So to show our gratitude, I would now like to invite Professor Udayangani Kulatunga to kindly come forward and present the token of appreciation to our resource person, Professor Nilas Pereira. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you, madam. So with that, we conclude research methodology session now. But ladies and gentlemen, the sessions are not over. After this session, we'll be starting another interesting session, which is called Fireside Chat. So remain with us. We'll start it in a bit. So as I mentioned earlier, we now move on to another interesting and interactive session once again. The session is called Fireside Chat, centered on the theme AI at the Crossroads, transforming virtuals and mixed reality for the future. This session promises to spark insightful conversations about the cutting-edge advancements shaping the future of technology and innovation. To guide us Through this session, we are fortunate to have with us a dynamic and experienced facilitator, Dr. Prabodh Gunasinghe, from the University of Moratuwa. With his expertise and engaging approach, we can look forward to an enlightening session, I believe. So let's warmly welcome Dr. Prabodh Gunasinghe to the stage. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you very much and good afternoon to all of you. I know that everyone is waiting for the lunch. I think before the lunch you will get good thoughts for the food with this discussion. For that we have two prominent scholars as our panelists. Let me invite both of them. First, Professor Kaushal Keraminiyage, Professor of Societal Resilience and Disaster Risk Reduction at the University of Salford, United Kingdom, with expertise in resilient and sustainable communities, smart cities, and digitalization. A renowned academic and mentor, he has over 125 publications, led multidisciplinary research projects, and served globally as a PhD supervisor, examiner, and visiting professor. I am cordially inviting you to the panel. The next panelist is Professor Amila Tibbotuawa, a professor of logistic engineering at the University of Moratuwa, with extensive expertise in AI, Industry 4.0, 5.0, and supply chain optimization. A globally recognized researcher, he has worked on projects with Airbus and authored over 100 publications and 15 book chapters, driving innovation in logistic systems. I'm welcoming you to the panel as well. And we have two prominent scholars who are working with different disciplines. And today we are going to talk about artificial intelligence plus, sometimes you might think that, that our panel is more into social supply chain management. Even me, I am more into fashion design and textile and apparel engineering side. And so what we are going to talk about AI. So here, this discussion is not about purely talking about the artificial intelligence as a subject, and we are going to talk about how artificial intelligence is going to use in virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality, and how it would be in future. That is our focus in this discussion. So let me move into Professor Kaushal with the first question. So how you are defining AI and its move in this modern world?
Thank you so much, Dr. Prabodh. And it's my absolute pleasure to be here. Well, I graduated from this place, so my pleasure to be here today. Right, so talking about AI, the first declaration that I have to make is actually AI is not my prime or my primary research area. I'm a social scientist. I study about societies, people, communities, and so on and so forth. But of course, I'm very much fascinated by technology, and I am actually studying about the impact of technology in creating societies, communities, and so on and so forth. So these are absolutely a brilliant opportunity for us to talk about how AI and VR, AR impact our societies, communities, as well as other fields as well. So to answer your question, AI, well, I thought I'd define AI in a broader sense rather than a more commonly adopted sort of a definition. So I see AI as sort of, well, let me define it as a sort of a artificially created system. I specify the term system there, which is intended to perform certain tasks under normal circumstances which would require a human-like intelligence. So, in my view, artificial intelligence actually go beyond what we see in the current terms as a technological solution. It goes beyond, certainly, the electronics that we see today into a more systems approach, in my view. So when you talk about AI, you know the basics of AI. Well, when you take the definition that I provided, well, if the most commonly used tools these days like ChatGPT and so on and so forth, if you take some of their definitions, some of their classifications about how AI actually evolved or how AI is evolving these days, there are, I believe, 5 levels that they have developed. The OpenAI has developed, or rather defined, 5 stages. The first being, I believe, the conversational AI, then we have the responsive AI, then we have the autonomous AI, and going towards innovation as well as then the systems, right? So that's one classification that we are coming up with. I think still we are in the very early stages of AI. We are still dealing with the conversational AI, level 1. And we have a very long journey to go ahead to get into the other aspects of AI, like the responsive AI, the autonomous AI, and so on and so forth. Of course, we touch upon some of their sort of ideas and concepts, but we are still within the level 1 AI, in my understanding. Well, in order to talk about other elements of AI, well, technologically, we are talking about things like machine learning, deep learning, speech synthesis, and so on and so forth. I think that's not the purpose of this forum, for us to sort of go into the technical details, fundamental details of AI, but rather to talk about how we use AI and what's the future of AI, I believe. So I believe that's a sufficient introduction to AI.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that this discussion is also connected with what Nilesh was talking earlier, that one person asked about whether can we use ChatGPT in our analysis or data mining stuff. So we were in the back rows, myself and Professor thought, can't we put them GPT as co-author, like a way? So that would be the questions, as you said, that we are in a transition period, and we as humans now, we are still struggling to identify what is AI. So we should be getting ready for the new normal, I guess. So there are sometimes the AI technologies, AI applications might be our companions. So in that sense, what's your idea that what sort of technological movements in this field, not only in AI, our topic is about how AI is crossing with AR, VR and mixed realities. So what's your purview, Amila?
Thank you, Dr. Prabodh. So it's a pleasure being here and talking to you guys. So of course this is a hot topic, as you mentioned. Like we were in the background, we were thinking like why can't we put AI as a co-author, right? So that's how far that we have evolved. So when we come back to this mixed reality, especially the virtual reality and augmented reality and extended reality, I think almost all of you have experienced at different levels. So is there anyone in the audience who has not played any VR games, like AR VR games? I don't know. Have any one of you have never experienced anything, any VR? Like, oh. So maybe I should like give me my VR devices to you. Like actually I first fell in love with this when my brother actually gifted me a VR like Oculus like few years ago. And then actually I realized like it's so crazy. Like for example, especially in playing games, like you can always get a near reality experience. Especially like if you want to play cricket, for example, you can with the devices you can just go in, you get the feeling that you're actually in the ground and actually like some fast balls like I don't know Stark is bowling to you in a very high speed and you can bet like you can get that real experience. So these things actually emerged mainly with VR devices like Oculus, but then you have from Meta they developed like Oculus 3, like a little bit of advanced, where now they have this pass-through technology where it has become AR because you can see the real world and the virtual world at the same time. Because those days I had the challenge because like when I was playing the VR devices, VR games, like I was having the headset, I couldn't see the real world, so sometimes my siblings were coming and tickling me, so I didn't understand. Like, but these things not happen. Like, you can get the real world experience and the virtual world experience same time. And also, then one of the advanced devices, like we all know, is like Vision Pro. The Apple launched it. It's pretty expensive than the Oculus, but still, it can give fantastic experience in mixed reality. And the other thing is like Meta was developing these smart lenses. Like they're not that heavy like the Oculus. It's just like my spectacles. Of course, initially they came with sunglasses, but with Ray-Ban. But now you can have the same thing. You never know that this is actual glass or like a smart glass. But you can do everything, like almost everything that you can do from a VR device. So this has become something like Kiri Penny in the AI world. Like AI is like your head, and now the body is like the mixed reality of like the devices that we are using. And for students, like I know that most of you are very happy when you do the online presentations because you can use ChatGPT to make the presentations and maybe read it out. But when you actually do some presentations and like deliveries, it was challenging because like it was not with you. But if you can buy these smart glasses, guys, you can still do it. Like, for example, if you're presenting in front of a big audience, you can still see the audience at the same time. And also you can read the script and scan how the people behave, and you can see which segment of the audience is unhappy, who are happy, and who is going to ask a question. So everything you can see from your glasses. So we are at that level with the technology in day-to-day life.
I think it's a good move to the discussion that how Professor Amila evolved with virtual reality to mixed reality. I guess that we are in same kind of age, and we start from the floppy disk in our age, and now we are moving towards, even both of us talk about where to buy Meta glasses in Sri Lanka. So with that, it is talking about something about the society and the behavioral changes. As you mentioned that if you want to play a cricket match through your computer, you can put the VR box and you can set up the speed of the ball, and if you want, you can set up the fielders, and then you can just click it and you can play it. That was the initial stage. And there that you have no connection with the world, you have to just wear the box and you had to play it. And someone can come and interrupt you as well. But now it is moving towards from that to the reality, the real world, with this augmented reality to the mixed reality. It means we are gradually moving with the behavioral changes. Behavioral changes means the society, the social levels also changing. So, Professor, so what do you think that how it would be making an impact to the society with all these social and behavioral changes?
So that's a very good question, and that's what I've been sort of investigating about in some of my research. Before we go into that, actually, I think one of the interesting things that we need to explore is actually the true meaning of reality as well as the intelligence. Because we are talking about virtual reality and artificial intelligence. So what is reality? Well, let me ask a question from the audience. How many of you are not using mobile banking or internet banking? Not using. All of you are using, right? Or some of you are not. Well, I don't blame you. Well, let's think about it a little bit. If you really think about banking, we are talking about money, right? Money is a tangible thing, and we see money as the reality, right? That's how we do economic transactions. If you take mobile banking, do we see real money? So is it really then a reality or a virtual tool that we are using? But did you ever think about mobile banking as a virtual tool? I believe with time, we have now converted our perceptions about reality with virtual aspects, isn't it? Because we now see mobile banking as a reality. We see that as real money in most of the cases. So, the virtual aspect or the reality aspect is actually a concept that we have in our minds. It's not a physical thing. We can't define reality as something that we can touch. It's actually a perception. So because of this, the virtual reality and the artificial intelligence is more of how we perceive things, how we sort of understand things. In that sense, I think understanding artificial intelligence in the society as individuals is quite an important aspect, because I'm touching a little bit of sort of a philosophical aspect of virtual reality, going beyond or going outside the box, to really prompt you to think about what really artificial intelligence is, or what really virtual reality is. It's something in your mind. It's something as a society we all sort of subscribe to. And over the period of time, well, if it is a reality, it can't change, right? If the reality is something, well, static, then it can't change. But as I've just demonstrated, it has changed. So, in the future, I think the artificial intelligence aspect and the virtual reality aspects should really focus on not only technological innovations, but the interaction with the human being, how they perceive what their future to be, as well as the community aspect. And one other thing before I actually hand over the mic back to you. Artificial intelligence, when you say intelligence, it gives us the impression that it's an individualistic thing. We think that as human beings, we have intelligence as individuals. But if you think about the intelligence in a deeper manner, how do we develop intelligence? We develop intelligence through interactions. So the society gives us the intelligence. In that sense, when you talk about artificial intelligence, can it be created only looking at an individual? It needs to concentrate, or it needs to focus on the interactions between individuals as well. I think, as it stands now, the field of artificial intelligence did not look into this aspect in great detail. So the creation of intelligence as well as the concept of reality needs to be defined, I think, in a more, how should I say, realistic manner, if I'm allowed to use that word. I know this is not the typical AI discussion that perhaps you all wanted to hear, but I thought I'd give you some food for thought, really to explore the fundamentals, the root of artificial intelligence. Are we really looking at what we think the future holds?
I think that's why the beauty of the Morato University Research Week, that we bring different aspects, not like that sometimes we feel like AI might be belongs to certain framework, certain subject area, but when you start talking about AI with a different perspective, it might open up several aspects. That's what happening with Professor Kaushal, I guess. Professor, can you further elaborate that how it could be used with the social and behavioral aspects with your this perspective?
Yes, so let me give you a few examples. So I started by defining artificial intelligence as a system, right? And I said, I didn't define it as a computer system. I think if you look at the textbook definition of AI, most of the time, if it refers to a computer system, right? But I didn't define it as a computer system. Why? Because artificial intelligence can come from variety of sources. It can be from electronics, computers, or it can be actually biological. As long as we create the system artificially and it then absorbs the intelligence as a human being, or similar to how humans perceive their intelligence. So with that in mind, let's take an example. Such the second level of AI, as defined by OpenAI, is something to do with decision making, right? Responsive AI, right? And as human beings, we are making decisions based on our rational, based on the rational that we perceive. In order to make a decision as human beings with our intelligence levels, do we always only consider the logic, or do we have other inputs considered as well? Say, for an example, the characteristic of a person, whether you are, let's say, whether you have jealousy, would that have an impact on your decision making? In reality, can AI represent this, or should AI represent this? One typical example is, I'm sure you must have, or some of you at least, might have heard about this classical decision-making experiment in psychology, where the train driver's dilemma, right? I think some of you may have heard about it. So there's a train driver, and the train, and there's two tracks. On one side, you have one human being tied up to the tracks. On the other side, you have 5 human beings tied up to the tracks. You're the train driver. You can't stop your train. You have to make a decision instantly. What would you do? Would you go through the first track so that you will only kill one? Or would you go through the second track where you would kill 5 human beings? This typically is a sort of a, how should I say, a decision-making process, right? Would you say the current AI can make a decision on this particular classical question? Can the current AI make a decision on that? It gets more interesting. Let's imagine, so most of you would say that, yeah, it's just one, so if I don't have any other option, I just drive on the first track so that it's one human being, right? Now let's make the things more interesting. That first person, on the first track, we have one human being attached to the track, and that human being happened to be your brother. Now what happens? Can AI make a decision on that? Now, hopefully you can see AI, or the intelligence as we define in AI, is not a true representation of the intelligence that we see in human beings, in the society. So this is where the debate should be. I'll come back to that. I have some more ideas about, like, perhaps we can talk about in other questions when we talk about other aspects of AI. But these are some food for thought. Social science research, well, I'm sure in research in the AI field, when we are doing research in the AI field, we've seen so many things like, okay, how to synthesize speech, how to do deep learning models, and so on and so forth. That's all good and well. But do we have the level of intelligence or can we create the level of intelligence artificially to mimic actual decision making, considering the social aspects that we as human beings take into consideration? So I think I answered the question. It may be long-winded, but
and you confuse me as well.
I am a social scientist, so I can't help. So yeah,
I guess that it's beyond that filtering some research papers by using AI, isn't it? In this house that I think we have full of postgraduate students, that whatever the thoughts that you split out might give lots of topics for new research, isn't it? Because it's beyond what we discuss with these computers and the phones or whatever, what we thought about AI. Well, now I'm moving towards Professor Amila again. So can you further elaborate that how mixed reality is used with different applications in this modern world, and what's your idea on it?
Yeah, so adding something on top of Professor Kaushal mentioned, like it's about like perception, right? Like for example, even in these mixed reality objectives, like the technologies, mainly what we see is like, of course, like we see it from the eyes, like we get the sensations from the eye and the ear, but like now they are adding other parts as well, because like its perception comes from all the sensations. Like for example, they have AR shows now, like so you get, for example, you can train a worker in a very dangerous environment virtually, like I don't know, middle of the sea, somewhere down in a like a very dangerous place, like where you have to create nuclear energy or something like that. So you can get the sensations for the body as well, and maybe in the future, I don't know, they will create some things to get the taste, like whether this is like feeling yummy or bad. Like you'll get devices for that, and also like, of course, there are some devices they have created to get the smell, for example. And I saw some like MR devices which are gloves, so you can wear the gloves, and when in the virtual environment, when that is cold, so you can feel it in the glove. When it is hot, you can feel it in the gloves, like that. So it is developing in that sense. So little by little, so it's trying to reach the actual perception, of course, but it'll be a long way ahead, right? And talking about the applications, so there can be so like limitless number of applications. So for example, as students, like if you're studying biology, so earlier you had to cut the frogs and see the things for real in anatomy. I don't know, many different dimensions, like, but you can virtually cut a frog and see how it is, and you can go inside the human brain and see how it behaves. And even like if this goes so far, maybe you can try to create a digital twin of the train driver, if you can get all the information to him with the emotions and all, maybe try to replicate it to get the decisions. For example, if you have the smart glasses, and if you want to cook something, because I'm not that good in cooking, maybe if I have the glasses, then I can go to the kitchen and ask him to let me come up with a recipe. So it will scan all the available items in my kitchen, and it will suggest what to cook and what to use next. And also, these devices now act as machine customers. We are like connected IoT devices, so it will know so what exactly in your fridge, what is the amount of milk that you are having. So if you are going to end milk by tomorrow, so it will send a message to your supermarket to refill your fridge. I don't know. So things like that will happen. So it's already there in the prototype stage. So it will take to the next level. And in the industries, like in logistics, in warehouses, like we already have the Microsoft like holographic lenses they're using. So the pickers, they know where to go, what to pick, how to assemble. They get the information real time there. If you're in the construction industry, if you're building skyscrapers, so you don't have to have the plans and everything. Like it'll be showing in front of you right time at the same time, real time information. And if you're doing a surgery, so when you do the surgery, so it will show the enlarged version of the heart and all the nerves and everything, how to do the cut exactly. So it will help the life in different dimensions. But you never know where it will end up. For example, like even this intelligence, like we have to come up with a better definition maybe. So the beautiful thing is, like for example, this AI was there like for 1950s and those days as well. But and also these ML and like deep learning models, they came up with a boost around 2010. But with this Gen AI, now it's like going in a very high speed. Like you don't know where the limit is, and we are talking about the singularities and things like that, where now we have AI agents who are expert systems, and like if they start to communicate with their own language, and maybe if there's possibility they can surpass the humans as well. So there is lots of limited potentials in this.
Yeah, it gives some sort of insight that we are gradually moving towards everything as humans. From we are getting up in the morning from the bed until sleeping. Sometimes in the middle of the sleep also we might use AR, VR thing that earlier we used to have that natural dreaming, and sometimes we might program it to have some sort of dreams in future in our blood as well. But again, still what is circulated in my mind after that, what you explained, now we can see all the humans are moving towards all the aspects of our life, from sleeping to cooking to learning, teaching, researching, mining papers, everything. But still, the intelligence, the word intelligence that we have identified and defined might be having many things to be explored. So there, my question is, now what Professor Amila said, it's about the community. Humans, we all are living together, and it's community. It's a society. So, like you said, I'll come up with small example actually which I have seen in social media. A Tesla car has identified a man in the side when it is driving itself, and to avoid the accident, it turned it into the middle and hit a car. Sometimes it might evaluate it. The other car might be also having some airbags and the impact might be less. But still, the driver's relation might be there, which cannot be identified by Tesla. So in that sense, similar way, not only such kind of things, as Professor Amila said, we are going to cook. Sometimes in the kitchen, we may be having all the ingredients. Someone might put some poisons in that thing, and it might only see the visuals and read in all the visuals and giving you some solutions. We don't know. So in that sense, there's some sort of a hidden impact other than what we see with certain things. If, as a general scholar, if you ask about the AI and its impact on scholars, it's like the struggle that we are having with whether we are going to use it in ChatGPT or not. Even when I'm going to a lecture and when I'm giving an assessment, I am thoroughly telling my students, if you go with ChatGPT, I will catch you. That's very simple when it compares to your argument. So in that sense, sir, so what could be the social impact, not what we are seeing now, in the future with AI and its related things with AR, VR and mixed reality?
Yeah, that's a very good question actually. So as Professor Amila has mentioned, I think one of the key aspects of the future of AI is the singularity issue, right? So we all know that, well, there's this argument to say, well, I think Elon has said by 2026, in 2 years' time, the singularity will be realized, in the sense the artificial intelligence will take over the human intelligence. Whereas I think it was Kirkis, the Google director, the director of technology, he said, well, 2045, that will happen. But the fact remains, there's this argument or there's this belief that eventually AI will take over the intelligence of the human beings. So let's talk a little bit about this. Now, how could this happen? What is the impact socially on that? How many of you are, be honest with me, now when you're driving, think about the road ahead up front or before you start the journey? Or how many of you are planning the journey before you start your journey right now? If you ask the same question from my dad didn't drive, but for the sake of argument, he would say, before every journey, I would plan my journey. I would say, I would select that road, turn there, and so on. And nowadays, with the introduction of some sort of a virtual reality with the Google Maps or whatever, we have the meta-knowledge inside us to say, we don't have to worry about it. Someone else will do it for us. What does that do to you? That actually kills a skill in you, an analytical skill. That analytical skill is the fundamental building block of what is known as the innovation, isn't it? We need to have analytical skills in order to innovate. How does the innovate come about? For anything, for any subject, how does the innovation comes about? Through need. We have a need, so we innovate, right? With this understanding of meta-knowledge where somebody else, the AI, will do the stuff for us, we remain stagnated without innovating. Now can you imagine what will happen by 2045? As human beings, we don't innovate. We don't have the skill set to innovate. Without innovation, it's entirely possible that the single source that we are reliant upon for our daily tasks, the AI, would take over the innovations from us, right? That's possible, isn't it? We have the evidence in front of us. We killed some of our skills, essential skills, because of the readily availability of some of the tools that we are using today. That is how I see the singularity or the future takeover of human intelligence by the machines. If somebody asks me what future holds in AI for the society, that's my vision. Well, forgive me for being so negative. Actually, I've been talking so negatively about AI, but that's not the case. AI is a fantastic tool, let me say. I've been using AI throughout. Actually, I've been using ChatGPT. I've been using other tools in my profession, both for research as well as other activities, industrial activities like building information modeling and so on and so forth. So it's a fantastic tool. So as all the other digital tools. But we have to keep in mind what it gives us and not what it takes away from us. The idea is then for us to minimize the impact, the negative impact on us, but to use the tool as a tool. Can we do that? I don't think we are planning to do it. I don't think that we are actually realizing that danger yet. We are taking things for granted. We are being lazy, basically. We ask AI to do so many things, technology to do too many things for us at the expense of killing our own skill sets. That's how I see the future. But again, forgive me for being the devil's advocate. I'm not totally against AI. I'm actually in favor of AI, but I'm trying to bring a different perspective from my research background as well as from my understanding to ignite the debate about where should we head in terms of the direction of AI and the virtual reality. So yeah, that's my view.
Anything to add, Professor Amila? How about the future? How you see it?
Yeah, so I kind of completely agree with you in some areas. For example, like long time ago in the history, the machines or the technology were like dumb, but the people were smarter. But with the evolution, now the machines and technology becomes smarter and smarter, and the human beings have become dumber and like stupid. So that is kind of the things that we can see in most of the cases, right? And especially with the AI taking over like maybe humanity in the future. For example, now they have these AI agents, like we call them AI agents, where you have expert systems like with Gen AI, you have these like large language models and all, but then you have these audio models and video models where I think some of you might have experienced the deep fakes and things like that. So when these expert, like now there are these expert systems, AI agents, like which are specialized in different domains. For example, like logistics. So there can be systems who are like purely expertise on that, and in fashion designing and like in sociology, there can be AI agents. But in the future, like still they have not like started communicating to each other in their own language. Like so in the future, so when they start to deal with each other, so there's a possibility for them to get the control, right? So So even like when we were students, like we had lots of like viruses at our computers, like I don't know, Trojan horse in those days. But nowadays we don't see much because like the cyber security and all like develop in such a way. So sometimes we can kind of prevent it. But same with AI, like we have to come up with some strategies to prevent them taking the control. So they call it actually, the experts call it, we have to decide when to pull off the plug, right? So we have to come up with strategies like policies, rules. I don't know, a ChatGPT policy or AI policy, like we are to capture when they are crossing the boundaries and doing things under control and things like that should happen. So it will definitely should be there. But of course, whether we like it or not, we cannot stop the rapid growth of this. So we have to adapt our lives with it. So if not, like we'll be people like who will be losing the boat, for example, we'll lose that opportunity. So we have to just wait on the dock where everybody will be going on that ship, right? End of the day.
In conclusion, if I summarize everything that from the AI to VR, AR, mixed realities, we are in some sort of a very incremental behavior of developing the technology while we are missing certain very important and crucial human elements. So that would be the challenge as humans, because we built AI, we built VR, we built mixed reality. So are we challenging our extent? That is the question on the table. So with that remark, I would like to open the floor for the audience to ask questions. I'm actually with some sort of a very mixed mindset at the moment. Before I sit in this chair in the starting point, I was in a different feel, in a different perspective about the AI. Now I am driving towards different areas, to be honest. So if you have any questions, it's open to you. It's your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaushal and Professor Amila. It's really interesting. And what I feel as a background of social science and cultural studies, I feel that we are still beyond, the AI is still beyond empathy and sympathy factors of perception. Those are really matters. Because in Sanskrit, it says that a person will build us wisdom through pratibha, vyutpatti and satadabhyasa. Pratibha means the born talent, and vyutpatti means the education. Satadabhyasa means the continuous practice. That means, I think AI is still beyond that, the human capacity and that aspect, the perception. Thank you very much. It's really interesting.
Thank you. There's another question over there in the middle. If you can pass the mic.
Thank you very much for the nice discussion. These are very simple. I don't know whether it is simple, but may I know what your definition on intelligence from the human perspective as well as from the artificial intelligence perspective, please? Thank you.
So I think you can answer.
Yeah, the question is for Professor Kaushal, I think.
All right, thank you very much. I think you put me under the spot. So, well, anyway, it's not a simple question. It's actually one of the most difficult questions in the universe, really, to define intelligence. But let me break it down to simple things. So, if you take an individual, the intelligence, in my view, come from the qualities. The qualities may be developed from the interactions socially, as well as the inheritance from the family, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, the exposure to certain events. Say, for an example, a person might develop intelligence about how to survive a disaster. I'm talking about disasters because that's my field. About a disaster when he or she exposes to a disaster few times, let's say. right? That gives the experience to build a certain level of intelligence, how to deal with that. So, if you break down intelligence in that manner, it's individualistic to start with because you carry certain qualities, your jealousy, your empathy, that contributes to it. That's the first part. Second, your environment contributes to it. Third, your interactions contribute to it. Fourth, your experience contribute to it. So that's how the human intelligence is built. And that's how I define human intelligence. When it comes to machine intelligence, it's all in data as far as I understand, as far as how the things are sort of visible at this stage. So it's about identifying patterns in data and using probabilistic evaluations as to whether this is X or Y. To me, that's not really the intelligence as the same intelligence in a human being. It's a different level of intelligence. It contributes to the skill development, yes. It can become an expert, but it's not the same intelligence as I defined before. Whether it's useful, definitely it's useful, because that gives us the freedom as human beings to perform repetitive tasks most of the time, the tasks that we don't want to perform. And that level of intelligence is important. But the danger, as I mentioned, is if you think that intelligence is a substitute to the human intelligence, then we start stagnating. We start being lazy. We let our capacity to diminish. We let our mental capacity to remember things. We let our skill set to diminish in terms of making decisions and so on and so forth. That is the danger that I see. So, I think I provided you with a simplistic answer that may not be a comprehensive or a scientific answer to what intelligence is, but that's how I see the difference.
Any other questions?
I think they're hungry for lunch.
we can wind up if you don't have questions.
So I'd like to ask a question from Professor Kausha. So you have mentioned about the singularity and how people we give AI more and more crucial things to do as time goes on. So do you think there's a possibility that humans will fight back against that? That we'll lose our freedom in the world?
So I think that's a very valid question. When I say the singularity, well, I didn't put a negative spin on it. I didn't say that it's a bad thing. But when we say the singularity in common discussions, it seems that the singularity is seen as a negative thing. Machines taking over humans, right? That's the general perception. Is that really a bad thing? Why do we consider somebody else taking our place as a bad thing? Is it because we'd like to retain the autonomy, we'd like to retain the authority in what we do? Is that why we think machines taking over our intelligence is a bad thing? That's a different debate to go ahead with. So, I think because of the human behavior, if machines are taking over the day-to-day routine work of people or human beings might not fight against it because they will be happy about it, because then our lives will be easier to start with. But the problem comes in 2 or 3 generations' time, when we realize we don't have the basic skill sets to survive. We don't know how to survive a disaster. We don't know how to cook. We don't know how to navigate our roads. The basic skill set is lost. At that moment, when the machine says one thing and we follow, if something goes wrong, that's possibly when we start realizing, did we make a mistake? By that time, we may be too late. But it's the way that you see how the things will progress. But the singularity may lead us to that point. So the answer is both sides are possible. We might fight against that, or we might embrace it to say that, yeah, fantastic. We can just enjoy our lives as we define it.
Good plot for a film, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. It's like we are still writing the script. So, in the future, we'll be actually have to act like really live in the film.
But the crazy part is actually Night Rider concept came in back in 1980s, and it took around 30 years to see the reality, the actual autonomous car. But here, I have seen these things back in 2017 in Black Mirror Netflix TV series about those meta glasses kind of stuff and all. 8 years back, and after 5 years, it was in the market. That is the, I can't say danger. That is the speed actually that we are having. Sometimes what we discuss here, today it might be a plot for a film, but next year you might see it. So we need to get ready to face it. So that might be the challenge for the humans, specifically the humans like us who are staying in a country like this, having very slow speed to the exposure to the technology, having very, in the morning also have seen that the word poor. So, see, so in that sense, we can't retain like that. Anyhow, we have to find ways to tackle that challenge. With that remarks, I would like to wind up this session. I think that's why he's here, right, to alarming me. So what, you have a question? Can you give the point?
Go for it.
My question is, I'm coming from a finance background, and as far as I know, these days the wealth management sector in financial industry is changing. So I would like to ask my question to say that can we create artificial intelligence to the actual decision making? So in a country like Sri Lanka, we are still having some resistance to accept technologies. But in global market, we have global advising platforms as a alternative with human advisors. And that is also to some extent, as humans, we have, I believe that from my perspective, I believe that we have to some extent, we are risk-averse people. But when it comes to AI platforms, they do not consider this risk factor. So my question is, if this kind of technology to come to Sri Lankan market, would it be possible to accept? Will there be any cultural factors? So I would like to ask from your expertise, how much will it be success in markets like Sri Lanka?
That's a very good question. If may I, please? Yeah. So that's a very good question. Let me tell you this. What you're imagining right now is already happening. So let me take an example from where I come from, UK. So the financial market, for an example, if we are to take, let's say, a mortgage, here you have to go to the bank, talk to the manager, and so on. There's human interaction, empathy, the family background, the story that you tell, all that matters, right? Because human beings are making decisions. In the UK, any loan, if you're buying a house or mortgage, the first step of the financial approval, the approval of the financial application is through AI-assisted decision-making systems. We all have a credit score. That credit score is actually built based on several factors, things like whether we have made the payments. I think there's a similar system here like the crib and so on. But it takes into consideration other things. Whether I have a boy or a girl, that matters as well as my kid. Things like my ethnic background sometimes matters, even though that it's not legal entirely. There are things like whether I have a second house, whether I have a health history. All these things are taken into consideration when making a decision, right? So the first step is when I apply online, that has to be done most of the time. Even if you phone up, they will fill the online application for you. So no escape there. You have to go through the online system. When you fill that, it gives you a score that determines whether you are getting your loan or not. The decision is made by, as we define, an AI agent, right? And you can challenge it, but it's very hard. Most of the time, that is the decision. Where's the empathy? Where's your story? Where's the culture? And 95% of the time it works in countries like UK because they are typical cases. 5%, let's say for the sake of argument, they have other elements attached to it, the culture, the story, empathy, and so on. They are lost. In countries like Sri Lanka, I think this 5% can be as big as 25-30% because we have strong cultural links. We have strong family links. Because of this, using AI tools for financial decision making, even like I'm talking about financial decision making in loans, but the same applies in investments as well. Even in that, what AI does is it's statistical modeling, right? You make a probabilistic sort of a determination to say whether there's risk or not and so on. But in countries like Sri Lanka, where the cultural links are so strong, the family links are so strong, everybody is an uncle or an aunt, I think it's really hard to implement systems like this. If we start implementing it blindly, we might see lots and lots of problems without considering cultural aspects first or the social aspects first. So this, I'm saying, I know that in this country, we are going through an era where we transform our society into a digital society. We are looking at digital banking, digital hospitals, and so on and so forth. Technologically, they are relatively simple solutions. A programmer can program. A systems architect can design a system. But the real problem is about implementing that in a culturally sensitive society. So the digitalization of the country is not a technical matter, it's not a technical problem, it's more of a societal problem. The sooner we realize this, the better it would be for us as a country, as Sri Lanka. But if we blindly implement digitalization, AI or whatever, then we will be actually solving problems for the next 10 years, 15 years, whatever it takes. That's my understanding. There are countries which are easy to implement technological solutions like AI. There are countries like ours where we will face significant challenges because of our cultural and societal ties.
What came to my mind was the day I think we transferred from 20th century to the 21st century. If you belong to generation X or Y, you can remember the tension we had. The computers will be exploited like a way, that kind of very dramatic situation we had about that day. That's what I think that you are talking about. But what came to my mind when you are talking about financial systems, even in UK, it's for, I think Professor Gopura should be taken this into the consideration, the ethical clearance process. I think it's AI based in UK universities. But here I think we might take around so many months sometimes. So the initial screening you can do within 5 minutes in other countries. So we can think about those kind of things. With that remark, I would like to wind up this session. I know if you thoroughly concern the discussion, it might open up your thoughts. Most probably it confused me, to be honest. I guess same in you also. What came to my mind that we have to get ready for the new normal, or we have to challenge it. I am still selecting facing to the new normal through getting died and rebirth again in that society. It's easier, I think. So with that remark, I would like to hand over this microphone to the compeer. And thank you very much, both of you. You have given us some sort of different and vibrant thought process to think about AI, VR, AR, and mixed reality.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Over to you, sir.
Let's give a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, my heartfelt appreciation go to our dear facilitator, Dr. Prabodh, as well as our two panelists for enlightening us with an insightful panel discussion on AI. So generative AI and robotics, these topics are trending right now. So I believe the audience and everyone who was listening to it might be enjoying it to the core. So with that, to express our gratitude, I would like to invite once again Professor Udayangani Kulatunga onto the stage to hand over the token of appreciation to our panelist, Professor Amila Tibbatuava. Thank you, madam. Now I invite Dr. Tharusha Ranadeva to present the token of appreciation to Professor Kaushal Kereminiyage. Thank you, Doctor. Finally, I invite Professor Ruwan Gupura, Dean, Faculty of Graduate Studies, to present the token of appreciation for our facilitator, Dr. Prabodh Pudasinghe. Right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, let's give a good round of applause to our panelists as well as the moderator for giving us a nice panel discussion on generative AI and related areas. So with that, we conclude the Fireside Chat session of the Research Week 2024, and we expect everyone to see back here after a quick break, sharp at 2 p.m., where we are going to start another interesting session, which is called 3MT Challenge. See you at the 3MT Challenge.